Ladies and gentlemen, we have three speakers. Alison has given this one the charming name of Shifting Ground Moving Images, and our speakers are Shuyu from SFU, Mr. Sion Assouline, who is there, an independent scholar, and Tami Blumenfield from the University of Washington. We have an hour and a half for this session, so everybody will have 20 minutes. And then I will start murmuring that they should finish. Are you ready to go, Shuyu?
Okay, I'm ready to go.
Perfect. So our first speaker is Shuyu, Making Blockbusters with Chinese Characteristics, China Film Group and the Transformation of Main Melody Film.
Thank you. I like to show you a trailer from of two movies. The first one called Not, 云水谣. As you can, it's already started. Yeah, maybe it is. First, the full, it's the first take. Or maybe I can go at the beginning and the full screen.
Well, then I just need to.
Yeah. Can we go back? The full screen? This one? Yeah.
Do you want to turn off the image after you finish the clip?
Yes, yes. But another one. This is the first one. And okay. The second one, I don't know. I need to show it. Probably already. Well. Let's look at this one for again. Just tell me what you think this film is about, and what kind of film, what the genre probably is. It belongs.
Lord of the Rings.
那天我都疼成那样了，你还打我一巴掌？是性感的。我喜欢你。生了个女儿子，我要等秋水。
I try to find the founding of the republic. Trailer. So my computer is difficult. The founding of the republic.
You want the trailer or?
Yes, that's a trailer. Okay. The trailer, and it has the one. Yeah, this one, the first one. Okay. Just click this one. Yep. Okay. Oh. Yes. Good. Thank you. And after this, I want to hear you use it. Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Alison and the Chinese Research Center for organizing this. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? For organizing this symposium and give me a chance to continue to finish a paper I started last symposium at SFU. And in that paper, I talked about the propaganda film in contemporary China and used the first film as an example. But then, the founding of the Republic came along and gave me more topics and a new perspective to complete this paper. And I'd like to start with a question. How many of you heard of or know anything about so-called main melody film, 主旋律电影? Chinese is 主旋律电影. And not bad, actually, fine. And how do you think these two films, these two, just a trailer, but maybe some of you already watched at least the second one. How do you think they fit with this 主旋律 main melody film as you read in some of the research described what main melody film is like? Any comments? And anything new in this main melody film? If I say these two, they are the newest development of main melody film. This is what I'm going to talk about today. The recent films like The Knot, which was made in 2006, and Founding of the Republic 2009, present difficult cases for people who used to neatly divided contemporary Chinese film into three categories: main melody films, political propaganda one, and commercial one like Feng Xiaogang's 贺岁片, and art or independent films, which each one excluding the other in terms of production resource, cinematic style, and social functions. This propaganda blockbuster, this I quote the Associated Press used to talk about the founding of the Republic, point out, in Tang Xiaobing's word, how little we know of mainstream Chinese filmmaking. And despite its persistent industry presence and its increasing crucial role in the state's maintenance of both ideological and organizational control of the Chinese film industry, mainstream filmmaking, I'm talking about both the commercial films and the main melody films, has remained an understudied topic in Western scholarship until recently. Compared with the numerous studies on independent or underground and documentary films produced in the last 2 decades, this serious lack of purposeful neglect is very obvious in the study of the main melody film. So, from the passing remarks, the research I read, it basically be described as a cinema of a heroic image and pedagogical messages made for political campaign and anniversary celebration, and they are staged political propaganda film without any development from the Maoist socialist realism model. So within that context, what has been written on main melody film, I think this recently the successful, boxing success of box office success of main melody film such as The Knot and the Founding of the Republic provide a compelling case for re-examining the recent development in mainstream Chinese filmmaking and the complex cultural reality evolving around it. Basically, this paper is a long paper, and I think I just pick up some of the main points and give you the outline how I develop this paper. Basically, my aim in this paper is not just to understand how the state still plays a crucial role in producing national films in a market economy, but also how a unique state-led commercialization has fused the market logic and a popular entertainment culture into the Chinese official culture system. And to provide the context and the framework for these two case studies, I first examined the emergence of state-controlled media group, such as the China Film Group, and their involvement in producing Chinese mega film. 中国的大片巨片 blockbuster, and then I'll carry out a close reading of the note, focusing with the first case focusing on the narrative strategies and the cinematic language it adopts from popular cinema, both popular cinema and the revolutionary epic, in transforming melody film into a popular crowd pleasing spectacle with a positive message about family and the nation. And then I'll use the production practice and the critical discourse around the making of the founding of Republic, and discuss how political occasions, revolutionary history, and state power can be utilized for capital accumulation and market monopoly in China's attempt to rebuild a national film in a globalized era. So the first part of my paper basically examined the China Film Group and the emerging so-called Chinese blockbuster, 中国的大片, and China Film Group probably some of you already heard of, because basically it's a co-producer of all these major mega films from China. And this China Film Group is a state-owned film conglomerate restructured from 8 former state institutes, including China Film Corporation, Beijing Film Studio, China Film Co-Production Corporation, and CCTV movie channels in 1999. It claims, this is from their website, the most comprehensive and extensive state-owned film enterprise in China, with the most complete industry chain and facilities film production, distribution, and exhibition as coordinated process and integrated film, TV, and video into one single entity. And you can see this is a very ambitious company, and obviously there's a corporate structure of streamlined operation, secure access and shareholding in film, television assets, and a line of various sectors to build a mega media entity. And I'm trying to use this China because it is one of the, not only the dominant, the major player in Chinese film industry, but also because of its nature as a state-owned company, which is play a role in exercising state's total market control. So I use this China Film Group to see from institutional perspective, to see how state now, just like Yue Zhi talked about in his political economy in the communication in China, talking about how state try to preside in again in this market economy, and through such a state-owned media groups, and its role demonstrated in. First, was mainly in importing, Hollywood mega film, and China Film Group is only one has a license able to do it, because it's a privilege associated with the state and actually representative of state to import things. But later on, recently is involved more in producing films, and not only producing producing domestic mega film. Now, first it was basically involved in as a co-producer with some of those private-owned company like Huayi Brothers, and to make Chinese mega film, like also Zhang Yimou's like Hero or Chen Kaige's Promise. China Film Group is involved in distributing and exhibiting. But recently, its role also is demonstrated in initiating changes in making 大片 of different genres and use these mainstream blockbusters to monopolize as well as regulating the market. Because this 大片, commercial 大片, around developed first, it's kind of developed by lots of those private company, and you probably know several of them, from the 2002 all the way to 2006, like The Curse of Golden Flower. And then the state not very happy with the kind of the direction it goes to, So, and how to control it? Obviously, now in this commercialized kind of time, and use the previous method, it doesn't really work anymore. One example is like those main melody film. The state-sponsored main melody film is always like what they call the box office killer. Like nobody want to watch them. So they needed, like this Chinese film group need to initiate some new kind of mega film, and in order both regulate the market and as well as promote this politically correct film. So starting with Zhang Side in 2004, and also this breakthrough with Not in 2006, and finally with a huge success in the founding of Republic, Chinese Film Group seemed to set up a model for main melody film to be transformed into mainstream film. This is I quote from Han Sanping. Han Sanping is the CEO of Chinese Film Group, and now involve two concepts. Main melody film, 主旋律电影, and this notorious reputation associated with it in the last 20 years, right? Nobody want to watch it. But then now mainstream film, we call 主流大片, 主流电影, 这个主流. And what does that mean? And while Chinese Film Group doing all these experiments with film, and Chinese critic, academic, and officials also churned out this discourse or term or concept is mainstream film. And according to one film critic, Yao Shuguang, very a big player, and he defined this, says mainstream blockbuster is not only the commercial blockbuster, but more the mega film created and produced by Chinese national film industry that reflects mainstream culture and mainstream values, and whose historical and aesthetic value can be tested. It is a commercial mega film, but more a mega film of national spirit. Although there's a lot of very ambiguous word there. What is the national spirit? What is the mainstream? For example, what is mainstream culture and value nowadays, right? But this is the definition, and obviously this, especially after this. Founding of Republic came out. There's a huge kind of lots of writing about what is mainstream film, and how to make Chinese mainstream films in order to compete with Hollywood blockbusters. 2 minutes, okay. So obviously, I haven't really get to my case studies, but the Not, I basically use the Not to talking about how to use vernacular genre. This particular one is a Chinese 文艺片. Chinese 文艺片 used to be very popular in 30s, 40s Shanghai, and also later in 50s, 60s Hong Kong, and 60s, 70s Taiwan, called 文艺片 or romantic. Basically, you can loosely equal to romantic or family melodrama. And I analyze how the knot make use as a narrative on the formula conventions from Wen Yi Pian. But anyway, so and also I talked about how it's targeted in a new audience or new audience by this adopting a global Chinese or a cosmopolitan young character, or also a narrator called Isabella. This is a character you see. This is played by a Hong Kong actress who basically born in America but traveled back to Asia, to China from Shanghai all the way to Tibet, and to look for her root, and also look for her aunt, who is the main character of her aunt's lost love. So that is this is a new awareness of the audience, young audience, and global audience in this recent melody film. And well, I don't have time to talking about the founding of Republic, but with founding of Republic, I'm more talking about from the production and promotion aspect in that production and promotion, how this commercialization, marketization is really the market logic, how it is fused into this culture system and also power relation in China, in contemporary China. And I don't have time to talk more in detail, but this basically this is the idea I'm trying to. So yeah, just use a couple minutes, a couple of sentences to wrap up. In the age of globalization, where subject matter, financial and human resource, and the market across cultures become increasingly shared, Chinese filmmakers are increasingly aware of the power struggle within the film industry and the ramification of creating national films. And so I quote this Han Sanping's comments on what is a Chinese film and how we compete with Hollywood, and how we, to export Chinese value and our so-called soft power. And so judging from the success of the founding and the knot, and China is indeed developing its own brand name of national film as copyrightable, marketable, and profitable, but at the same time politically correct film. Yeah.
I'm just to the extent that they're planning to export these new mega films, like Founding of the Republic, for example, are they thinking chiefly of wide audience, or are they hoping that plain old Americans and French people and so forth who don't have any connection with China will also be buying tickets for these movies, or how far ahead are they thinking in those lines?
Right, I think
they probably would sell lots of tickets in Richmond. Will it sell
in
tickets
Australia,
in
certainly, I think it played in some of the theaters. In Australia, I read somewhere it's played in some theaters. And also, of course, it's in like Hong Kong, and also in Hong Kong and Taiwan as screened publicly. But I think that in general, the Chinese film group does have this plan of promote or export their film overseas. And but in individual cases, I think for example, use this too. I think with the knot, certainly it does definitely so clearly they do have this at least to global Chinese audience.
Okay,
like whether it is a full Western or not, and you can see it even from the storyline, from the way the film, the setting of the, and also they do have this promotion kind of plan for overseas. But with the public the founding of the Republic, I don't know how much effort they didn't put so much effort in overseas promotion, except overseas, maybe overseas Chinese audience. But because basically this film was mainly made for the 60th anniversary celebration, so definitely it's a domestic market more in mind. But you have to, I mean, I feel the general guideline definitely is globalized, export, but with each individual case, you probably have a different.
There was I don't remember the name of, some of you might have seen it, there was a Hollywood movie about a history professor played by Alan Alda who gets involved in the project to film some event in American history. And when he complains that the history is all being twisted around to make it entertainment, some cynical producer or director says, look, the three things will sell a film are explosions, destruction of property, and people taking their clothes off. And I wonder the extent some of those, at least the people taking their clothes off, is inconsistent with, the new Chinese spirit, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, maybe not taking clothes off, but at least 172 stars, celebrities from all the world, in the founding of the Republic, and really entice the audience, especially even the young audience, right? So there's some different Chinese indigenous kind of method to commercialize.
Time for one more question. Tom, you had
do you think is their main target Hollywood or is it Hong Kong?
I really haven't read anything they say they main target is Hollywood in terms of like exporting the Chinese film to American audience. But they realize that even within the domestic market, Hollywood is a big, it's a #1 anime, and the fact it was for over from 94 to 2006, mid 2000, almost over 10 years. Hollywood was the biggest player, and the national so-called domestic film. The domestic film was, just couldn't compete with them. But since 2002, there is a change in the last 5 years. Chinese, since 2004, domestic film, the box office from the domestic film now already
domestic
I mean Chinese film.
And not Hong Kong.
The revenue, not Hong Kong. There's more than from Hollywood.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker is now ready, and our topic is borrowing Badas' eye, Chinese ink painting meets digital photography. So.
You might wonder if the borrowing of painters' eyes is an ongoing activity of mine. Well, actually, yes, in the sense that seeing differently is what I find interesting in visual arts. Before taking these high-contrast black and white photographs at Jericho Park, I used to borrow the eyes of imaginary painters as I took close-up pictures of logs along Spanish banks. As the colors exploded after the rain, an infinite picture gallery was flowing out of driftwood. I would also recognize here and there a Goya, a Rauschenberg, or a Shitao. All of this under the knowing gaze of eyes recessed in the wood. I like to think that, like the ducks I started to photograph a few years later, the local spirits were undisturbed by my regular intrusions in their territory. With regard to these photos, I will make two comments about the color black. Actually, I'll add a third one, is that because of the ambient light, we cannot see the black so much. So I'll go back to the first one. First, by entirely enclosing the picture in the viewfinder, it empties the mind of the photographer and saturates it with a field of colored lights. Colored light. This can induce a state of receptivity akin to intense meditation. Secondly, I noticed after a while that my virtual painters had one intriguing thing in common. Contrary to real painters, they use black in a matter-of-fact kind of way, as any other color, without the usual associations to shadows, darkness of mood, or delineation. The spirits proved again generous when I started printing these color pictures on an inkjet printer. This introduced me to an unexpected reconnection with age-old sensations, the touch and feel of watercolor and ink painting, the last thing I would have expected to come out of a computer. The general background for the more recent black and white photos is my lifelong interest in the relationship between painting and photography, followed by a passionate interest in Chinese painting, especially in the work of Badas, a 17th century monk painter. The actual trigger was the purchase of my first point-and-shoot digital camera with the possibility of seeing and locking instantly a particular exposure on the LCD screen. This feature, called Live View, allows the photographer to view and choose the mood and contrast of the picture. It simply does away with any guessing or mental calculations related to exposure. The photographer can now instantly paint his picture, and that's another little miracle. At Jericho Pond, the high contrast interplay of ducks and reflections started to flow like ink on the liquid crystal screen. I have to catch up here. What is this bird up to? Is he struggling to obtain a good view of its own reflection in the water below? Is he practicing yoga or tai chi? Or just grooming? Maybe that awkward rotation is intended to reset the reflected sky above his head instead of underneath. Or is this bird merely looking at us, looking at him? The exaggerated eyes, which figure prominently in Badas work, seem to predate a well-known black and white photo effect. They strongly draw the viewer in and function like light sources. In the long history of Chinese art, Badas stands as a major Buddhist Taoist painter. His works exude the friendly irony of the philosophical writings of Shuyu. The quasi-human expressions he imparted, most often to birds and fish, marked a sharp departure from the realism of traditional Chinese bird and flower painting. With an extreme economy of means, he made inroads towards modernity by flattening the picture plane and using peculiar framing in an apparent random way, but with a typical effect of surprise, followed by questioning. The unique presence of his stylized animals anchors each image in a particular moment and a unique emotion. A curious feature of this painting here invites a little musing about the use of color in traditional Chinese painting. Here, Badas makes a subtle departure from his usual abstinence from color. He added a very faint touch of red to the tongue of a goose, leaving us guessing at his intent. See if you can see it. Until the 20th century, most Chinese painters used colors very sparingly in landscape and rarely mixed them in the other genres they practiced. In digital photography also, a selective reduction of the palette allows particular visual effects, sometimes recalling the first colorized photos before color development became available, or the works of pop artists and graphic designers. You can see the pacing is improvised, but with regard to landscape, I think Badas wouldn't take offense to my extending to him one of the famous insights of Jorge Luis Borges. Every writer creates his precursors. So does every painter. Badas traced his artistic lineage to Dong Wen, one of the quasi-mythical 10th century painters, credited for launching the earliest and longest landscape tradition in the world. Ironically, Badas only knew of Dong Wen from text and imitation of Tong Qishang, a Ming Dynasty painter with a sketchy theory on painting and an even sketchier knowledge of the painters from the preceding dynasties. Badas nevertheless revolutionized Chinese landscape painting, notably by pushing to the extreme the economy and efficiency in the use of the dry brush. In this form of minimalism, his main precursor was Nizan, the famous recluse painter from the Yuan dynasty. Badas uses here the traditional horizontal format called hand scroll, which allows successive viewing of segments of a painting from right to left. But he does so in a uniquely self-conscious way that strongly suggests a depth of field and a precise distance between the painter and his subject. Like a panoramic medium shot, it creates a particular sense of intimacy by drawing in the viewer. I doubt that such an effect was ever so precisely pursued by another Chinese painter. Badas landscapes would be hard to find in Spanish banks, but they often were in the back of my mind when I encountered interesting trees, logs, or stumps. These close-ups could have been imagined by a Song Dynasty painter or even by Hongren, another 17th century monk painter who spent most of his life depicting the famous Huang Mountains in a style as eccentric and austere as Badas. If painting and photography are the privileged modes of an infinite exploration of vision, their first encounter occurred in the 17th century in Spain with Velázquez and in China with Badas, long before actual photographic recording became available. Both painters stand as virtual inventors of the art of photography, in the sense that their images seem to capture effortlessly the surprise and wonder of a fleeting moment, all the while pointing to the uncertainty of vision. Velázquez also played with the relationships between the diversely framed mirrors and paintings he represented in his works. Badas played with the framing of the picture itself and suggested odd angles of vision. Both obsessively questioned the foundations of vision. Where exactly is the viewer? Who is he? Does he sometimes feel like he's being observed by what he sees? In doing so, they opened the way for modernity in visual arts and launched the interplay between painting and photography, which continues today. Photography prompted 19th century European artists to venture beyond mere representation and to look at other traditions, notably at Japanese woodblock prints. In this new reticence towards the accurate representation of figures and landscapes, they were preceded by Chinese painters almost a millennium before. The digital era may have triggered a pendulum swing. After having displaced and enriched painting for 2 centuries, photography is now open to fertilization by painting. I think that's very good news. Thank you.
Perhaps we'll follow the same format, and while Tami is setting herself up, if anybody has questions or comments for our second speaker, this would be a good opportunity now. Sir, at the back.
Yes, Sion. I mean, in your photographs, is there an intention or a conscious goal to reach this connection with the paintings? Or it's just that you realize it after the fact? You compare the result and you see that this connection is there. But has it been...
Like connection one-to-one to a particular painter?
Were you making an attempt to... I mean, what strikes me is that your photographs, in fact, there is this sort of a fact that they connect to some of these Chinese painters in particular. So my question is, I mean, it's sort of a naive question, but it might not be, because I know there's no such thing as an intention in art, and when there is, it's what makes the work fail.
Thank you. Yes, okay. Before my interest in Badas, I was just noticing, in general, by taking close-ups, I was playing this connection between painting and photography. So there was, I'm sure there was some memory going on, and the same way that then for the viewer, often people tell me, I see this and I see that and so on. So I would see the same, I mean, I would see my own things in the logs, like they were like mirrors, if you want. And here and there I would recognize this kind of style of painting, and sometimes some unknown painters, as it seems. Now with Badas and Wen, this is my first presentation, so I'm not sure I put the accent so clearly on the things, but the trigger was really that little point-and-shoot camera, because seeing on the screen the actual very contrasted, almost black and white picture of ducks and reflections, instantly I recalled Badas and Wen, and then I got into that game. So there it was more conscious related to him, but then I hope you don't see here an attempt to imitate Badas and Wen. I got somewhere else. But it's triggers. I think we do a lot of things out of memories coming back to us and associations and so on, and that's what I did.
Noah, you had a question?
Just Badashan's time. I maybe have missed that.
17th century.
Okay.
1626 to 1705, about.
I think I can answer the question about what the bird is doing, at least in a literal sense. It's preening, which is chiefly getting rid of parasites.
Oh, so it's grooming them?
Yeah, grooming, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Do we have one more comment or question? Tami, is there anything else? Okay, what we'll do at the end, if we've got a couple of minutes, is we'll bring everybody back for final comments. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. And thanks a lot to Dr. Bailey, who allowed me to do this.
Ready? Okay, thank you. So I wanted to thank you for the opportunity again. My name is Tami Blumenfield, and I'll be talking today about film festivals and participatory video in Yunnan province. And I'll be talking about a few different things. First of all, about the Yunnan Multicultural Visual Forum, which is an opportunity for film festivals in Yunnan to present filmmakers in Yunnan to present documentaries and have a kind of homeland so that other people who are also making films can get to know each other as well as have a chance to screen their works. I'll also talk about another film festival that I helped organize, which was held at Lugu Lake in northwest Yunnan province. And that film festival was an attempt to bring a lot of films about the Moso people made by outsiders to the community as part of a project aimed at hearing more local voices in the production of media about that community. And then to wrap up, I'll be talking a little bit about the implications of these two festivals and the interplay between these festivals and other kinds of participatory media efforts that are happening in Yunnan. So I think we see some interesting convergences of filmmaking, ethnicity, ecology, and social activism happening through these different forums. So we talked a little bit about minority ethnicity yesterday, and some people said that actually indigenous people were much more concerned now with modernization and not so careful to preserve indigenous forms of knowledge. We talked about the Dai Hills and about whether people really valued that kind of content anymore. And I believe that there was a rather pessimistic tone yesterday that said, well, actually, indigenous people are more interested now in modernizing. And I will argue quite the opposite, that actually we're seeing, as people reach a certain level of economic development, that they're actually very much able to...
We're working.
Oh, okay. I'll just keep talking.
Yeah.
That once they've reached a certain level of economic development, then they're able to say, well, this is really important to us as well. And our religion is not something that we're through with. It's something that's an important part of our identity. And so I had a slide up here. I think you might have seen it for a moment, of the sort of traditional minority ethnicity in Yunnan. So some images of people dancing in the full-fledged costumes that don't necessarily relate too closely to what they normally would wear, but are sort of a stylized version of their everyday dress. And I'm arguing that actually we're seeing a transition from minority cultures as a form of propaganda to minority cultures as a kind of commodity in the market era. And there's another transitioning happening that I'll speak about today, which is we're going from these cultures as being forms of commodity to actually becoming something that people from those cultures are using as a way to articulate their own wishes, goals, and hopes, as well as some concerns that they have for their community. Well, I will just keep going a little bit, and shall we take a moment to see if we can just wiggle things back in?
Now it's on the red light. Yeah, okay, should work.
It's coming.
Okay.
Keep
Oops.
talking.
Okay.
More talk, it'll hurry it up.
Okay. Well, Yunnan province is an epicenter for documentary film production, and it's also the home to a lot of non-governmental organizations. I have a quote about how Yunnan is both far from the center and close to the periphery, and so there's a certain level of creativity in artistic production that can happen there, and there's also a certain level of freedom from scrutiny from the central government. When you add that to the ethnic and the ecological and the geographic diversity of the place, it becomes quite a microcosm of artistic production and filmmaking. And so this is a slide actually of Zhang Yimou's production, Impression Lijiang, which is an open air, it can only be described as a spectacle with hundreds of minority nationality dancers in Lijiang performing, singing, and dancing. So using the actual physical landscape as a backdrop to the production. This is something that I had also showed in that last slide as an element of the kind of old form of minority consciousness, even though this is a relatively new production. Okay, so let's start talking about the film festivals. The Yunnan Multicultural Visual Festival began in 2003, and it was located in Kunming. Guo Jing, who is the director of the Yunnan Provincial Museum, was the founder of this film festival. And I'll also talk about a film festival called the First Yunnan International Green Film Festival that is scheduled for April 2010 originally. And the next part of these festivals that we'll look at is how the festivals themselves have become a venue for people that are doing participatory media projects to display their work. And so they've had kind of a dual goal of bringing together filmmakers who are already producing media and also showcasing some newer kinds of experimental media that would not have an audience outside of these festivals. So I wanted to show you the trailer for or the opening of Though I Am Gone, but this computer doesn't have flash, so I'll skip that. But I'll just say a little bit about it. It's the story of Bian Zhongyun. This is her over on the right side, and she was actually the first school teacher killed in the Cultural Revolution violence against teachers in Beijing. And the film is a very fascinating documentary by Hu Jia, and it shows Bian Zhongyun's husband. And he has saved her bloody clothing and her stained clothing from the day that she was killed by her students, all the way until the time that the filmmaker came to document this history. And it's quite a vivid and controversial film from the perspective of the Chinese government. And this film was to be the festival premiere in 2007, but actually it caused the whole festival to be canceled. Right before the festival happened, there was word that said no festival in Kunming this year, and no official reason was given, but it was understood that it was because of them programming this film. So even though they had been able to program some pretty edgy and quite controversial films about things like the Three Gorges Dam, other dam projects in Yunnan, this was too much. This is going too far. So we see here a kind of invisible line of censorship that on the other hand, everyone has to keep in mind when they're doing things like programming film festivals. Even though it was done in conjunction with official institutions, had a lot of state sponsorship. And so this is just a chronology of Yunfest. 2005, it was held in Kunming. 2003, it had also been held in Kunming. And then it had been scheduled on the 2-year cycle for Kunming again in March, but was postponed, and eventually a much scaled-down version of it was relocated to Dali, a nearby city with bi-ethnic minority people. And then after that, in the fall, a Yunfest tour show actually went to Shanghai. And this I construe as a kind of reaching out of the film festival coordinators, trying to say, well, we're not doing anything controversial, we're not doing anything against the law, but we need to do a better job of explaining what we're doing and spreading the message that we have some powerful films that need to be seen. So they went to Shanghai then. And then in 2009, it successfully went off. I'm sure that they didn't program anything about a beaten-to-death teacher from the Cultural Revolution, and especially not as the premiere film. And it is scheduled for 2011 as well. So, the Yunfest website, however, if you visit it at yunfest.org, you'll be visited by the friendly Cha-Cha the Cyber Cop. I don't know if you can see it down in the bottom corner, but you literally type it in. At least this happens in the United States. I'm not sure what happens in Canada. I don't know what happens in China because I haven't tried it from there. But you see the website come, and then right away she comes up there. And if you click on her, then you see all the details from the Xiamen Network Police, and they tell you how you should report this website and not visit it and be a good citizen. So it's really interesting that Yunfest, although it has been able to proceed now and has been quite careful in aligning itself appropriately as an institution, it still flags Cha-Cha the Cyber Cop. So this issue of an invisible line of censorship and permissibility in the growing artistic expression persists. So this new festival, the Yunnan International Green Film Festival, which is sponsored in large part by the Norwegian Embassy, had a new posting to its website. We're very sorry that the festival has been postponed until June, and there's a very excellent reason, and the reason is that there's an extreme cold in Yunnan province. So I don't know anybody involved in this. I need to get the details, but again, I think we have a similar situation where the organizers were not careful enough to plan and to coordinate with the government. So I think we really see that there's an issue of coordinating with appropriate institutions as well as just taking care to program appropriate material. That said, the festivals fill important roles. They can be one of the only times that people come together. It's not just about the films, it's really about becoming a community and creating a shared cultural space. And so I think we see here, again, international partnerships and funding really are important for the festivals. So Yunfest is heavily funded by the Ford Foundation and other outside institutions. The Green Film Festival would be funded by the Norwegian Embassy if it does actually happen. But these are only one element of the political strategizing that must happen to make the film festivals happen. So I wanted to say a word now about community-based media and include this quote from Wu Wenguang. Wu Wenguang is an independent filmmaker from Yunnan originally who has been quite important in the development of independent documentary in China. And recently, he's been involved in a project to take cameras and really train people from different villages, different communities, and how to use them so that they can portray what their lives are like, unmediated by the gaze of an outsider who really doesn't understand the local community context. And so he says here, what happens when the camera reaches their hands and their subjects become the people and events they are familiar with in their villages? Their neighbors, families, friends, the village head, and their co-workers. Then he talks about the interesting themes that emerge from these projects. And some of these projects then are screened at Yunfest as part of the participatory media forum in that site. So I just listed a few of the other projects. One of the projects funded by the Ford Foundation, carried out by the Vietnam Museum of Ethnology and the Yunnan Academy of Social Sciences, is a partnership between Yunnan and Vietnam. Really interesting cross-border collaboration. And Bama Mountain Culture Research Institute is the main organization that actually makes YunFest happen. So it's the organization that really supports the logistical elements of the festival. And then there's another participatory forum that also screens at YunFest, and this is the Shan Shui Conservation Center program, the Nature and Culture Documentation Project. And I liked the quote that is given here. Oh, this is funded by National Geographic. They say, this is the organizer who's saying, the films are a grassroots attempt at expressing the relationship between man and nature, which is a very common theme in Yunnan, the harmonious relationship between man and nature. And so this is a sort of very acceptable environmentalism that doesn't, at least in these senses, doesn't seem very controversial. And yet when you look at some of the films, they do really touch topics that could be seen as objectionable by state censors. Mostly, though, they fly under the radar of that gaze. And so the next part of my presentation, I wanted to talk about some of the intersections of these film festivals with other film festivals. So YunFest was one of the film festivals that inspired my collaborators and I to organize a festival in a Moso community in 2006. And YunFest itself was inspired by the Yamagata International Documentary Film Festival and received support from them, and also had some exchanges of filmmakers going between the two festivals. And I think it's important to note that there is now a festival circuit in China that is equally important to the international film festival circuit in terms of giving Chinese filmmakers visibility, letting them meet each other, and also just promoting the works. I think it's a very welcome change from the previous situation where people would not necessarily get visas to go present their films abroad, and it would just be very delicate. Some of the festivals are less officially sanctioned, and some of them are very tightly aligned with the state, but this is one of many, many festivals that are developing in China. So this is the Moso Film Festival. I'll speak about that. So Guo Jing is on the left. He is the founder of the Yunnan, the YunFest Festival. And at the Moso Film Festival, what we did is we wanted to bring many of the films that had been made about Moso people in a rather extractive way to document their society and their culture for outside consumption. We wanted to bring those films to the community to let people decide what they think of them themselves and to comment on them and use them to instigate a conversation about some of the topics and the process of filmmaking. And really we're looking for a discussion about filmmaking practices and ethics, but it did become a kind of community dialogue, and people were really happy to see the films. In some cases, the dialogue was not so analytical, but it was a nice chance for people to really just see their friends, see their families, see relatives that had passed away that they no longer could see on a daily basis. So it's very well received. And it was part of a larger project, the Moso Media Project, which was designed to help Na people have the resources to express their own ideas and make their own voices heard through film. And then just to bring these films back, as well as producing an ethnography of media production. So these are the collaborators I worked with on the project who helped me organize the film festival and who hosted the film festival in the museum. Arche is on the left, Doji is on the right, and that's me at the bottom. And we're all participating in a media training course that they also hosted at the Moso Film Museum, the Moso Folk Museum, excuse me. This is the office where we held the training, and then during the film festival, this is where we screened their kind of work in progress that Arche and Doji had filmed of a Moso funeral. This was a ritual from the funeral, funerals being a 3-day and very complicated process, that was no longer practiced in their village. And so the little girl in the red, when she was watching this video, she said, "Are those Moso people? Because I've never seen that ceremony before." But it was just a ceremony practiced in mountains around that village, but no longer in the place where she grew up. So it was really interesting to hear that kind of exchange happening between the filmmakers and the younger generation. That's Guojing again, watching the film from the computer. So I just included some more photos of the festival. This was talking about the Daba indigenous religious practitioners after a film in Loshui. And this woman is someone who had participated in filming in the 1960s and received work points to help act out the historical ethnographic film series that was made in Yunnan. And so she spoke about how things were different from that point and in the present day. And very fascinating discussion. It's the village head right behind her. And I just wanted to show you a film that we showed at the festival to illustrate some of the themes that we talked about. So Jatsujoma and her matrilineal family was filmed over the course of 10 years. And you see Jatsujoma, the title character on the left. And in those 10 years, tourism had come so strongly to the Moso communities that it was a very stunning juxtaposition of before tourism and the current situation, and instigated lots of discussion as well. This is just a pair of clips from the film. So many new hotels, and she talks about actually returning to the village from Lijiang, where she lives now, and having to go into a home of somebody that she knew and grew up with, and having the young women who staff the guest house there now say, "Oh, are you looking for lodging? We're here to book a room," because they don't recognize her. They're not from the village. The people who actually are from the village are maybe doing something else other than doing the daily work of receiving visitors. And so there's this kind of misrecognition of people from that community. So really some interesting things happening in that film. Of course, there has to be another level of mediation. So Arche at the left, he filmed the film festival discussions, and that's Feng. Oh, I'm sorry, Arche is at the right on your screen, and Feng Weiyang is at the bottom left. She was a classmate of mine in the ethnology program at the Yunnan Institute for Nationalities back in 2001, I guess. And she came at my invitation to the festival, and she also filmed the festival. She had participated in Yunfest before. So you see the festivals are kind of all circling back on each other. And then this film that she made, as part of a Rockefeller Foundation-funded participatory media training class, screened at Yunfest in 2007. Oh, sorry, 2009. I got that confused. So this is her film on the left, just the details. And on the right is another film that Arche made in conjunction with one of the women who attended our festival in Loshui. It was called What Shall We Do? Change in Loshui Village. So it really grew out of the conversations that were had at the Moso Film Festival. And it was a film about 5 different themes of changing culture in Loshui. And lots of conversations from people in Loshui themselves. So I think that while that film is not directly about the film festival, it's another outgrowth of that project. And this is the abstract for it. I liked how in the abstract they talked about it as the film as a fire around which the villagers get together and talk openly about the problems they face as a community. Because that was one challenge we had with our festival. We felt like we were trying to make it really for people in the community, yet we still used a system of lined up benches and kind of a rectangular screening hall. We had great discussions, but it did feel like sometimes language would affect who participated. Sometimes we spoke in Nauru and sometimes in Chinese. And also it did seem like there were some age and gender hierarchies in who would actually be willing to speak up. And so it seems that this film that they made functioned as a more open forum in a way, not with everyone in the same room at the same time, but kind of gathering people in a different mediated way. So the film festival that we did, I think, was a very successful collaboration and helped contribute to some of these discussions. As you can see through these activities, I don't think that indigenous culture is being left to be abandoned in favor of modern market economies. I think nobody is saying, well, we're going to still avoid electricity and not use the internet in order to preserve our culture, as some tourists might like. But what they are saying is, they're saying, well, we'll take the good from modern culture, and we'll also take and strengthen the elements of our own culture that we feel are important to keep alive. And so I also just wanted to end with one more film of Arche and Doji that was screened at yet another international film festival in Yunnan. And this was the International Congress of Anthropological and Ethnographic Studies, I believe. I forgot what the S stands for. And that was held in Kunming in 2009, after being postponed for a year because it was originally scheduled for 2008, and it was to be in July 2008, right before the Beijing Olympics. So even though this is a huge academic conference and film festival, it was perhaps not directly critical of the Chinese government. It was deemed to be too sensitive to hold at that time and just delayed a year, which made all the scholars who had already bought international plane tickets to attend very delighted. Because it was postponed, I think, in July 2008. It wasn't a lot of advance notice. But anyway, so they did show this film, and that's Arche at the right in the festival catalog. And it was called The Story of Imi. And it's a fascinating film that talks about a Dutch artist who goes to a Moso community and actually purchases the Moso home, takes it to Beijing for an exhibit about Moso matriarchal culture. And Arche and Doji filmed the family where the home was taken from and just described some of the controversy that engendered. And with that, I will conclude. Festivals are an opportunity to create community, to use visual media as a layer of cultural construction. I think these new developments in participatory media have a lot of promise for hearing more nuanced voices from members of communities, ethnic groups, and other communities. And finally, the people from indigenous groups and Minzu are coming together to use this media technology as a form of expression and an outlet for creativity. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And I really would welcome comments if anyone has questions.
Why don't we have a couple of comments and questions related specifically to this paper, and at the same time invite our other two speakers to come up and join us at the front. Yuezhi.
Talk about small world, academic world. Last year, October, I was at a conference in China, in Anhui, in the middle of nowhere. Listened to a presentation about Yunnan, presented by a Chinese organizer. Now I'm listening to you because when I meet you guys, she's talking about, okay, film festival in Yunnan, maybe she's talking about Yunnan. So, in that context, and in the context of your paper, I'm wondering whether you are, because this is a participatory documentary, independent documentary making, or that kind of thing.
Right.
I'm wondering whether you are aware of the work of Chinese media scholar Li Xinyu.
Right.
And she made a claim that in China there's an entire new documentary movement.
Yes.
And then the interesting thing is, in the context of that conference, and then when I asked that organizer, maybe you know him, I forgot his name, whether his this film festival and also these independent films, how they fit into Li Xinyu's claim that there's a new documentary movement. He said, no. He said, we're just play with documentary films. Because, and part of this, I think, has some sensitivity issue. That is, they do not want to present this as a political independent documentary movement, partly because they want to be careful with the state. And also in that context, I remember this discussion for foundation funding. Because the Chinese government is very sensitive about, foreign funded Chinese media production. So I was wondering how yourself think about or contextualizing this film or this festival vis-a-vis Li Xinyu's theory.
Yeah, that's a very interesting anecdote and question. I think that Yunnan itself, the Yunnan Multicultural Visual Festival, has almost created its own genre of documentary film. And I could talk about it's often using a certain kind of observational filmmaking and often addressing social issues, but not very directly, in a more roundabout way. And so things like Before the Flood, after the flood. I always get it confused. The documentary in the Three Gorges Dam area. If you look at the film synopsis, it's quite clear that the filmmaker is critical of some action or another. However, they're very aware of this invisible line that they can't really cross safely, or if they do cross it, then they won't be making films legally anymore and encounter all kinds of difficulties. However, I don't think it's right to draw such a stark boundary between Liu Xinyu's theory of the new documentary movement and the Yunfest genre of films, because, for one, many of them will circulate at the same festivals, and for another, I think that if you take away the context of being careful in an Anhui meeting, I wouldn't be surprised if they would spin it a little bit differently. And actually, this weekend at the University of Southern California, there's a conference where Wu Wenguang is and many other people from the participatory media circuit. And I would bet that their conversations are a little more open than could be had in China. Thank you.
Just a comment. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. You know, in the 1960s and up to the mid-1970s, the Canadian Film Board had a program very similar to this, where they gave what in those days were those heavy porta-pack things with reel-to-reel videotape to fishermen and various powerless people, mostly in the maritime provinces of Canada, and had people go to their communities and make programs that were relevant to them, and then those were taken back and sometimes shown to the cabinet of the government of Canada in Ottawa in order to give them a better understanding about what it's like to be a poor fisherman on Fogo Island in Newfoundland. The thing that's changed, of course, is digitisation and the availability of much more manageable sort of camera equipment and the possibility of streaming all of this to the internet. So I just wanted to put a bit of a plug in there that we Canadians were doing this long ago, but with much more heavier cameras that kind of broke your shoulder when you had to carry them around. But secondly, in New Zealand there's a Maori television station. Maoris were agitating for many years for their own outlet, and Pākehā said, oh, but it's apartheid, why do you need a separate, blah, 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 blah. But now Maori TV is the most watched channel in the country because the programs are uniformly good. They're this kind of a thing, instead of the sort of commercial rubbish even on the main state broadcast to the equivalent of the CBC. I just wanted to make that point, but thank you again for a very outstanding presentation.
Thank you. And I'm actually teaching a class right now about Indigenous media and film festivals, and so we do talk about that quite vibrant and impressive film history in Canada and Northern Canada, Alaska area, where I think that things like Iglula Kazuma Productions are models for everybody in the world who's trying to do this kind of work. And about the streaming media, I think that that's a coda to this presentation, which is really to say that in the olden days, when only by getting together could people really screen films and really know what each other were up to, it's a really different situation now, because YouTube and other kinds of social networking and streaming media sites, they might be banned 1 minute and available the next, but it's just so much easier to spread video online or spread clips online. So that's really changing it a bit too. And maybe the outcome will be that people don't get together as much and the filmmakers don't create that close-knit community. But I think that they've already built the foundation so that this work has a strong enough platform to continue.
I have a question regarding this, maybe you could call it ethnic tourism in China, and its local ethnic identity. I guided a group throughout Guizhou a few years back, and we basically did a tour of the local Aboriginal villages, and every time we got to a village they would greet us with a ceremonial clothing and music, and then there was maybe another performance. And by the third village, I realized that they're doing this twice a day. Sometimes maybe not so often, but it could be maybe twice more. A day. The bus, or maybe more. Right. The bus loads come. And in the past, these ceremonies used to be something special, unique, festive. And I was wondering, what do you think about the debasement of this part of local culture? Because you showed us an interesting and a bit of a different vision.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know that Guizhou, I've never actually been to those ethnic villages, but Tim Oakes and Jenny Cho have both done some really interesting scholarship of that process. And I think what they've found is that in some cases, we can put on our sort of critical Western scholar eyes and say these are terrible practices that are demeaning traditions and really taking something quite serious and making it nothing but a form of income generation. On the other hand, their research has shown us that a lot of villages are competing to be on that circuit. They want to be visited by the tour buses. They charge entrance fees to get in. The local tourism officials and local government officials are cashing in on this entrance fee also. And so there's, instead of what we might think of as a pity that the highway is going close to these primitive villages where people have preserved their culture for so many years, we really can't say longer than years because of all the changes we know about in collective era China and in the recent past before that. It looks a little bit different on the ground level. And so I think the question then is how much autonomy do the villagers have in determining what that ethnic tourism looks like? How much of the profits do they get to keep? In Loshui, it's been very fascinating because just the way that that community has functioned in a very united way. They've set up a boat rowing team. They've set up a team of people who will give horseback rides to visitors. And the two teams alternate. So one week you take people on the boat, and one week you take people on the horse. And then at night, every night there's a song and dance performance, a bonfire party, 篝火晚会. And at that bonfire party, they do the sort of, they do the circle dance that they've always done at, well, I can't say always done, but that they've typically done at festivals and funerals and New Year celebrations. And then they say to the tourists, okay, now we'll have some song performances. So that's part of a new part, that they're doing more of a performance-based format. And then they say, okay, now we're going to 对歌, we'll have a back and forth singing with the tourists. And so they're really taking a bit of sort of traditional culture, a bit of, often they sing Chinese pop songs or maybe some Moso folk songs in that performance part, and then really just tourist culture, and the tourists love it, and then the tourists come and dance as well. And so I think they've found a pretty good balance in that community between generating income and keeping some traditions safe from consumption.
We have 3 minutes left, and I thought perhaps anybody who would like to direct a question to any of our three speakers is free to do so. Shuyu, I think, will be asking Tami a question, please.
Yes, I'm just interested to find out what is talking about ethnicity and ethnic media and also ethnographic approach. What about this? What kind of role it plays in Chinese independent documentary movement? I'm thinking what. It's more like whether do you get a sense like when you actually participate in organizing this film festival, besides the local community use media to communicate, to change in some way their own neighborhood or community, but people who also participate in from outside and different places and whether they want to use this kind of film festival to have in some way have their own political agenda, like the 2007, obviously Hu Jie's that one is quite obvious one. And I'm also thinking about some of the early independent documentary actually are about those ethnic lives, like especially in Tibet. So this is a basic. I vaguely feel maybe. There definitely seems some people are using that ethnic life for some different kind of purpose.
Well, I think ethnicity in filming is really interesting in China because it's actually a fairly safe topic unless you're talking about, well, if you're talking about Uyghur or Tibetans, it gets a little bit more delicate. But most of the other minorities, it's a very safe topic for a filmmaker to cover. And so there are filmmakers like Chen Wei-jun who filmed House of Burulai Huozhe about HIV in Henan province and a family where the mother died of HIV and AIDS. Was banned from filmmaking for 3 years and because of that film. And then his first film after the ban was to come to the Moso area and make a film about Moso people. So it's sort of like a rebound film for him, using the ethnic minority as a topic. In terms of, do local people have film festivals with these goals? Is that what you're asking about?
No, I said besides the local people, like the youth festival, but also I'm more thinking about how about the outsider, like the people not necessarily from the local, but participating in those film festivals.
Very quick answer,
Okay. Well, I think what I can just say briefly is that there was a visual anthropology training program that was part of Göttingen Institute for Visual Anthropology in Europe, training people at Yunnan University. And so that institute, it's no longer active, but it trained so many visual anthropologists that then made films at YunFest, and those filmmakers kind of spread out into Yunnan and other places. So I think in some way their agenda is shaping how outsiders come into villages to make films. But I think we probably don't have time for a longer answer, and we can talk.
There will be time at tea time, I hope. It's just left for me, therefore, to thank our three speakers on your behalf.
Thank you.